My name is Sewoe Mortoo, and the story that I'm about to tell you is the story of two lineages that merged to culminate in me. It is the story of labels, both the ones we embrace and the ones we struggle with, and how the very labels that we reject can become the same ones we grow to have the most pride in. Growing up as a first-generation Ghanaian American, much of how I see the world and the labels I've inherited have been shaped by my parents and the stories they told me and my siblings when we were younger. My parents are immigrants, hailing from Keta and Tegbi, two villages not even 20 minutes away from each other on the coast of Ghana, which is funny because even though they were born in places so close, they met when they lived thousands of miles away from each other. My father immigrated to the United States at age 19 with an immigration visa, the help of his brother, and a single plane ticket. With no more than $500 in his name, he arrived in New York City and began working at a restaurant called Swenson's. Some of my aunts and uncles, family friends, worked there, helping him to get a job so quickly. The restaurant was full of Ghanaians that worked as busboys and in other jobs, but no Ghanaian worked as a cook. The chefs were all Jamaican. And while my dad didn't know anything about cooking, especially sandwiches and stereotypical American food, he did know that he did not want to be a busboy. So he said he could cook. And he took the Swenson's recipe book home, and when he wasn't working, he was taking notes. Now you probably already know this, but not every single country has sourdough and brioche. In Ghana, the main type of bread is white bread. And let me tell you, that is the best bread. And so in addition to taking these notes, he had to figure out where all of the ingredients were. But within 2 weeks, one of the veteran chefs would only work with him. My mother was born in Tegbi, but moved to England when she was 8 years old. Her parents immigrated to England years before to set up a life for themselves and their children. They faced racism their entire lives, and phrases such as "no blacks, no Irish, no dogs" were scattered throughout the town while they were searching for accommodation. The first house they lived in was shared with 5 other people of different nationalities, and so quarrels were rampant. My mother lived with her grandma until one day an aunt came and told her she was moving to England. Surprise! When she got to England, her first impressions were, and I quote, "I'll never forget that day. It was miserable, rainy, and cold, a strange place." But interestingly, the first impressions others had of her were similar. Her classmates thought she was strange too, and she didn't know English. So she had to take English as a second language classes before the challenge of normal school. We all know children can be mean sometimes, and to her, they definitely were. The other kids teased her for everything, her accent, her tendency to sometimes struggle with the language, and the clincher, her name. My mom's name is Ghanian, and they made fun of her by calling her any old iron. Little background about this particular time. My mother lived in England during a time when metal was being collected from different households, and so workers would walk through the streets calling out, "Any old iron?" Simply put, she didn't have the most pleasant childhood in England. I mean, could you imagine having a name as beautiful as Ghanian, which means it is good for me in the Ewe language, and growing to resent it because some people couldn't comprehend that it's okay to be different. And as she grew older, in spite of society telling her otherwise, she did grow to love her name because of what it stood for and how it made her unique. And in time, the same people who made fun of her became her friends, because they became more conscious of their actions. These labels, immigrant, African, they all became sources of pride for both of my parents living in places that didn't view them as so. Similarly, growing up, my cultural identity has also been a source of joy and pain. I mentioned earlier that I'm a first-generation Ghanaian American. So this dual identity means great things for my music library. I get the best of both worlds, growing up on Anita Baker, Lucky Dube, The Spinners, Hugh Masekela, and so many more. But it also means that I've often felt out of place as a Black person in America. Throughout my childhood, there were many instances of being told that I looked or acted white. Some background. I grew up in a mainly white town where I was the only Black student in my grade during elementary school and one of a few Black students during the rest of my schooling career. There are many ways to be Black, just as there are many ways to be white, which is something that apparently the people I grew up with didn't recognize. I know I'm not alone when I say that I've been told that I act white for liking Starbucks. But in all seriousness, these seemingly joking statements say much more about what's considered natural, acceptable, or even normal for Black kids. When I was in elementary school, it was seen as abnormal for me to be academically gifted. And you might think that returning to Ghana offers a respite of sorts. Sadly, no. Rather, when I go to Ghana, even though my parents were born there, Ghanaians still know we are outsiders and consider us Americans. So where does that leave me? Does my being born in America discount the fact that my family lived for generations in fishing villages? If I'm not considered African by Africans and not considered American by Americans, where does that leave me? Who am I then? I've had many years to contemplate this in my, albeit kind of short life. And my mother understands. She says that she's in no man's land because she sometimes feels as though she isn't accepted by Americans, Ghanaians, or Brits. And she's had over half a century to contemplate this, so she could tell you much more than me about how it makes you view yourself. And I don't have an answer to this struggle, but I know it's one that many other first-generation children of immigrants share. I briefly talked about my mother's name, and while my name wasn't made fun of in such a way, my experience with my name hasn't been much easier. My name is Sewoe, and I share this name with my paternal grandmother. It means God's work or God's gift in the Awe language. It is me. I love my name, how it rolls off my tongue. Sewoe Madeline Mortoo. But growing up as a child in the United States of America, I didn't always feel this way. I used to dread having to meet new people because I didn't want to introduce myself. I hated meeting new teachers or having to deal with a substitute teacher for the day because that meant having to go through the same thing over and over again. I don't think I'll even try to pronounce this name, and then everyone looks at me. Or I think I'll try the last name, Mortoo? Or isn't there anything else I could call you? Or how it would take weeks just for someone to learn my name. It's not a hard name. 2 syllables, 5 letters. Probably the easiest name to pronounce in my whole family. And yet, I still get surprised when someone pronounces it correctly on the first try. My mother taught me the importance of my name. She taught me to, no matter what, correct them every time. Because names have power. They are part of your heritage and encapsulate your identity. My name is Sewoe, not Zoe or Sewoe or Sewoe or Sewoe or even Subway. It's Sewoe. Throughout this talk, I've shared a bit about the power of labels in relation to my family and my experiences growing up in the United States. And while I know these troubling experiences are not unique to us and will likely persist, I'd like to end on a more positive note of things that I'm still learning. To be proud of your name, your heritage, in spite of what the world tells us. My name is Sewoe. Thank you.